I'm an individual who's played this game for a long time. I've pulled for an immense amount of characters, and I'm just talking about weapons. Well, I have a lot of them. Double Home, Staff of Scarlet Sand, and then a second one that's on Xiangling. I have invested a lot into the characters I like, whether it is my Sino, whether it is my Linne, my Eula, who's somewhere along here, my Yelan, I almost forgot her name, but I've invested a lot into the characters I enjoy. And one of the primary factors I think that more or less made me care less about the units that are coming out is the 4 stars. Yao Yao and characters like Kuki Shinobu are arguably the exception, but units like Lynette, units like Firminette, or even Faruzan and Mika to an extent, really don't drive as much, I suppose, attention as they otherwise should. If we're looking at the older roster of characters, Razor was your introduction to Andreas. He actually had an entire quest dedicated to him, introducing you to a weekly boss. We haven't had that at all. Every time after that, you've essentially either had it intertwined with a main storyline or intertwined with an Archon quest. More specifically, a character story for an Archon quest. Zhongli's second character story introduced Age to her. Raiden's second character story introduced, well, the Raiden boss fight. Venti, well, he doesn't get his. And Nahida's second story introduced a pep. And so what I want to get at is, we really haven't had, I suppose, the importance of 4 stars be brought back in. Razor was the only one to introduce you to a weekly boss, and everyone outside of that has kind of been forgotten, almost, in terms of the characterization of them and in terms of the strength of them. Razor had his time. He actually had his time alongside Diluc. Both of them were exceptional characters when they launched, when the game launched, but over time they fell off, and that's perfectly fine. Not necessarily bad units nowadays, but more so not as valuable in comparison to the other newer 5 stars that come out. Which, cool beans, great. But in terms of the other ones, Fischl, she's had her involvement inside the major Summerline stories, which is where she got this outfit, and we've had other characters get the alternate outfits too, but in terms of just the newer 4 stars, Kirara, Kale, you have individuals like Goro and Yunjin who are both niche supports, but if we're talking about and just removing them from the game entirely, and let's ignore those niche characters, Kale, Kiara, Lynette, Heizo, Firminette, and realistically, Layla too, are all very niche characters. Charlotte and Kave, as well as Dori and Kendake or Candice, aren't too useful. Like, yeah, they may have one team where they're an exceptional unit in, but much like characters like Toma, who really aren't as valuable and aren't units you want to prioritize building, I think that one of the downsides we've had as we progress into the game isn't necessarily the form of power creep, more so how 4 stars would just become irrelevant. I am incredibly tired of Xiangling, Fischl, Bennett, and Xingqiu always being the primary answers. Yes, we have Yao Yao now, who's your comparison to Baizhu if you don't like him, which I don't. But I do legitimately want, more or less, the game to kind of bring 4 stars back into a point where they're relevant. Like, yeah, I know individuals can say, well, the 4 stars aren't going to compare to a 5 star. Like, your Xingqiu isn't going to compare to your Yelan. But realistically, a lot of people had a C6 Xingqiu, and C6 Xingqiu can compare to a Yelan at C0. It's when you start getting the signature weapon or constellations that gap widens, which I'm perfectly fine with. If you want to have a 5-star character be good, but be the equivalent to a 4-star at C6, that's perfectly fine, and have those constellations bring more value to the table for that 4-star, or for that 5-star, I suppose. That's cool, that's great. But as of right now, you have a very low chance of being willing or even having a use for characters like Yunjin, Goro, Sayu, Diona, even Beidou to an extent. Even though these are older characters, individuals like Kiara and other units such as Lynette don't really have a place. You build them because you like them, yes, because you want to smash them, sure, because you think they're cute or like their character arcs, great, but you don't build them because you're going to use them. The vast majority of the time, a character like Xiangling is going to do much more damage to a lot of the newer characters. A character like Bennett or Xingqiu or Fischl are going to perform better as supports. Even Diona and Sayu still do great as healers and generalist shielders, so why would you use a Denjo shielder when you arguably have other options that you can? Firminette is a good character, but if you wanted the physical DPS, just use Razor, who gives himself more energy, shreds defense, and has much more constellations that you've likely already unlocked. Especially when his element naturally makes him a better, arguably better, support character with Denjo units as a whole. I don't like the fact that we've gotten 4 stars that are pretty bad in the community's eyes, because I do want a 4-star who's just good. I want a character, like, hypothetically, let's look at somebody like, I don't know, Lynette. Let's say Fontaine released, she's great, and she's good to the extent to where you might slide her up here with Fischl, with Bennett, because none of these characters have devalued 5 stars. It's not like you have a Bennett, so you're looking at a character like Kokomi, like, I don't need that, or you have a Fischl, so you're like, I don't need a Yai or a Raiden. They perform different roles. So you can be in a position to where you're like, I have a fully built Fischl, she's great, she has decent enough stats, but I want a Yai Miko. And you can build and get a Yai Miko and still use Fischl. These characters don't replace. You don't have a Xingqiu and are like, well, I don't need Yelan. No, you put Yelan because you like her playstyle, her character, or whatever else there is. A 4-star doesn't need to outright be better than a 5-star. A 4-star at the very least should be good. We've kind of reached this point where they aren't. And it sucks because I legitimately do love characters like Razor. He's one of my favorite characters in the game. I like Fene. He's cute. He's breedable. I enjoy this character. But there are no situations where I'd really want to use him, especially when we're talking about damage dealers like Fremy, like Lynette, who don't really have a place because in terms of DPS, they lag so far behind their respective other counterparts. Like, your Lynette is never going to be your Xiao or your Wanderer, which is fine because their role is hyper carries. But why is it that the damage difference is so high? Why is it that Kale's Boomerang sucks so much that it's not even worth building her the vast majority of times if you have alternate options? Why is it that the 4-star healers we got haven't exactly had any potential buffing capabilities? Diona's good as a healer, but she's older. Why is it that Goro needed C4 to even be a decent healer, or even have the potential to be a healer for your Geo teams, when the only other option the vast majority of the time was just having a C6 Zhongli, which many of you don't have. Even I don't have, and I love this character. I want 4-stars to be competitive. Zhang Ling, being the Pyro Archon that she is alongside Bennett, isn't good. Because yeah, they've avoided power creep and your investment is safe with each of these units, but it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't get stale, it doesn't get boring. I want a 4-star that's good. I want someone to make Xiong a viable character to utilize. I want a reason to bust out a Fremy, or a, Kave, Dory, Charlotte, any of these other units. But we don't really have that. Candace was kind of forgotten about. She was used in like maybe one team, that's it. But we've had these situations where yes, we've seen characters like Jean rise back up, but there's never going to be a point in which your Diluc rises up, because your Diluc now has to compete with a Yan Fei, with a Linne, with a, Yoimiya and a Hu Tao. Your DPSs that were 4-stars and older 5-stars aren't going to get their time to shine, because if it's just about strict damage requirements, there are so many other units who can outpace them. Which is, yeah, sucky. It's awful. It's bad. But in terms of the supporting characters, in terms of the individuals who are meant to be off-field, who are meant to perform a utility-based role, it's not looking too good for them. Just comparing the support, let's ignore the damage of any of these units. Your Xingqiu, he had damage bonuses, and then subsequently he also had damage reduction and minor healing. Which, cool, great, whatever. Your Yelan doesn't have that. Okay, fine. What about the other newer units? What about the other units you're supposed to support? Well, if we're comparing the DPSs of a Fremy versus a Razor, ignoring constellations altogether, Razor gets an attack speed bonus, electro resistance bonus, he has his resistance to interruption increased, he subsequently also has physical damage in his kit, he refunds energy if he swapped out early, and increases his own energy regen, which is great. He also decreases his own cooldown. Slide that over onto Fremy, however, and yeah, you have the option to build him full cryo, or to build him full physical. I don't think a lot of people understood that, but you can. But in terms of the ultimate he gets, in terms of the additional damages he has, he doesn't necessarily, I suppose, buff himself to that extent. He reduces his cooldown, sure, and he increases the damage dealt when he triggers Shatter, but that is a team comp specific one. He needs Hydro for that, whereas Razor doesn't necessarily have those requirements to be met. And ignoring, this whole passive, because everybody either has the same passive, which is decreasing sprint, or something that you're not really going to use. I think Xiao, for instance, has one of the most useful, which is the climbing stamina reduction, which I don't understand why we don't have many characters like that, but whatever. I want 4-stars to be good. And complexity doesn't necessarily make you good. Fremy having a shatter-based playstyle, which either incentivizes you to build him ice or incentivizes you to build him physical, doesn't work when physical was a dead element. The last physical-focused character we really had was Eula, and it took like a year for her to get a rewin. I don't think it's a fair comparison. I want more variety. Not necessarily in terms of what they can do or the damage they deal, but more so in terms of the characters I can use. I want to build a 4-star and not have to put an ungodly amount of effort into them to get them working. I don't want to have to get a character like, for example, Fremi, a 5-star weapon and unholy levels of good artifacts for him to be comparable to a 5-star T0. When we've had 4-star characters who, even if we're talking about them as broken units or whatever the case may be, were good at base value and just got better the more investment you put into them. As of right now, unless you use a Yoimiya or somebody who uses normal attacks, Yunjin's worthless. Unless you use Geo characters, Goro is worthless. Unless you use physical characters, and even if you do, Mika's probably not the best choice. And that sucks, because I understand people do like these characters. I like these characters. But it just feels bad to invest into a unit knowing you likely won't ever bring them out on the field, because that unit can be replaced by either a 4-star you've already built, or a 5-star, or anything else. Or a character whose kit seems really bad, but is designed around constellations improving it. Or a character who is bad, but becomes better much later on through the arbitrary release of either a new element or an Archon. I don't know. I just miss the days when 4-stars were good. But tell me your thoughts. Do you have a 4-star you enjoy? I obviously like my Razor. I like my Diona. I even like Yara. She has some really good arts. Clawley's cute, Goro's cute, etc. But tell me yours down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye.